Chapter 6, Roadshow. The following week was a blur of trip preparation and continued Aaron immersion. We had really begun to spend most of our free time together, which was wonderful for the most part, as my infatuation was still in full bloom. However, when he complained about my going away with RG, and I had pointed out that he'd just gone to New Hampshire with Brayman, Aaron had suggested that Brayman's trips were more important. Needless to say, that hadn't gone over well. Aaron had backtracked and sworn that he didn't really think that, and was just sad that I was leaving. We'd made peace, but I'd felt the old tension creeping back into our bliss. I was grateful that the Senate was out of session because the less frenzied atmosphere proved more conducive to ensuring RG was about to have the 4 best open meetings of his professional career. They were scheduled for Cleveland, Toledo, Columbus, and Cincinnati in that order. RG had expressed an interest in traveling by train instead of car for as much of the trip as possible, which I was both excited and nervous about. Though I knew all the statistics about how many more auto accidents occurred in relation to train derailments, I felt more in control when I was either the person behind the wheel or knew the person who was. Perhaps introducing myself to the conductor before each leg would help put my mind at ease. The night before I was scheduled to meet RG in Cleveland, Liza, Ryan, Aaron, and I went out in Adams Morgan, one of my favorite DC neighborhoods. Liza convinced me to vamp up for the occasion in some ligament-spraining stilettos that made it impossible for me to walk comfortably for more than a few feet at a time. I felt like an invalid. She assured me I was a hot invalid. Ryan offered that his favorite porn movie was Hospital Ward Hoochies. I wondered how much longer he was going to be on the scene. Once the dancing started, I was barefoot within 30 seconds and infinitely more comfortable. A veteran of countless solo home dance parties, I was a bit more self-conscious in front of a crowd and tended to restrict the majority of my performance to joke moves. I was particularly skilled at the Running Man and some of MC Hammer's more advanced parachute pants maneuvers. Aaron was more a product of genteel dancing schools and had a little trouble keeping up. Though I appreciated being with a man who could spin and dip me with confident authority, I'd never warmed to the whole dancing school culture. Growing up, its elite prissiness had turned me off, though I knew there was a good chance its products regarded my particular style as vulgar and immature. Aaron didn't seem to mind it, and he even laughed appreciatively at my extended tribute to Madonna's Vogue video. Liza and Ryan did the lambada the entire night, regardless of the song. When we finally had to leave at 3 a.m. because the place was closing down, we were sweaty, tired, and energized at the same time. I couldn't bear the thought of re-imprisoning my carefree feet, so Aaron gave me a piggyback ride to the cab. It was as we were pulling up to drop Liza and Ryan off that Ryan put his hand on my leg and suggested we all spend the night together. Liza looked horrified. Aaron seemed amused. I tried to make the proposal less distressing by laughing about how fun a sleepover party would be, but insisting that, unfortunately, I really had to get a good night's sleep in preparation for my trip. Ryan warned me not to work my butt off because it was, quote, so fine as it is, end quote, and climbed out of the car. Liza followed with a glazed, quiet expression and closed the cab door without saying goodbye. Ugh. When we got home, I didn't know if I should call her immediately to make sure she was okay, or pretend that nothing had happened. Aaron insisted rather insensitively that Liza was a big girl who could take care of herself. Luckily, he added endearingly that he needed my undivided attention because he couldn't get enough of me. I decided to call Liza in the morning. I woke up excited for the trip, but reluctant to leave. Aaron got dressed as I finished packing. Was he really going to miss me? Was I really going to pack graham crackers and a jar of marshmallow fluff? I wanted to have snacks for the road, but maybe I should stick with ones that required less assembly. On the other hand, fluff was remarkably tasty. "Don't forget your charger," Aaron said as he tossed it to me. I always forget mine. Did he want to make sure I was fully charged so that he knew he'd be able to keep in touch with me? In my previous experience, guys didn't tend to think this way, but maybe it was different. "So, what are you up to for the rest of the week?" I asked in an impressively casual way. I knew he had a lot of work to do, but I was really referring to what he was going to do at night when he wasn't hanging out with me. You know, this and that. I've got a college buddy who might stop through for a couple days. Buddy generally meant male, right? There is no way to fish around without sounding paranoid, which, of course, I was. Good Lord, had I always been this jealous? I didn't remember myself that way. I found it frustrating that Aaron had this effect on me. Even with his faults, he seemed to possess some quality that made me want to hold on suffocatingly tight to him, and I had to spend a lot of energy resisting the impulse for both of our sakes. He carried my bag to the metro stop. The strike had mercifully only lasted 2 days, where he turned me to face him. "Ohio better not steal you back," he said as he kissed me goodbye, "or it'll have to answer to me." I smiled and kissed him long enough to provoke a "get a room" cry from a passing skateboarder. Half an hour later, I browsed the magazines at an overpriced newsstand while I waited for my plane to board at National Airport. For some reason, I hadn't gotten the latest issue of The Economist in the mail yet, and the cover advertising an article about Europe's take on the American healthcare system signaled that it was an issue I needed to check out. I scooped up a copy and also nabbed an Us Weekly for good measure. The flight to Cleveland was just over an hour long, certainly not enough time to fully engage in the Economist article, but just time enough to update myself on the recent Hollywood rumors. I was sandwiched between two businessmen in dark suits. One was typing furiously on his laptop, and the other thumbed importantly through a large, financial-looking manuscript. I self-consciously hid Us Weekly between the folds of The Economist in the hopes of appearing more professional. Before I made it through a single celebrity photo caption, I found myself engaged in a silent elbow war over the armrests. I firmly believe that the occupier of a middle seat, by virtue of the fact that she was clearly the least comfortable, should have first dibs on the two flimsy armrests that defined her inferior space. My roommates seemed to disagree, and the battle was fierce. I glared out of the corner of my eyes at my opponents. On top of being ungallant, they were no doubt germ-ridden as well. I cursed them in my head. I finally attained a strategically strong position towards the front of both armrests, where I could slowly inch backwards, knowing my enemy's elbows had nowhere to go. Satisfied, I turned my attention towards giving the appearance that I was reading very serious political articles, while I secretly soaked up the latest celebrity gossip. An hour and 15 minutes later, as I made my way through the Cleveland airport, I noticed a slight commotion at a nearby ticket counter. A little entourage of people was urgently explaining to a hapless airline employee that they really needed to get on that particular plane despite its sold-out status and their lack of tickets. I'm supposed to be in Des Moines in 2 hours. Would you please just ask if anyone is willing to give up their seat? As soon as the woman spoke, I recognized her voice and slowed to take a closer look. Sure enough, it was Melanie Spearham, senator from Illinois and current presidential candidate. I stopped completely to observe her, pleased by the unexpected opportunity to do so. Most people considered her the first woman in the country's history to have a viable chance of being elected the leader of the free world. For though Brayman led the pack of candidates, Spearham was close behind and gaining in the polls. However, at the moment she had apparently missed her connection and was nearing a meltdown, a rare sight, or at least rare when the cameras were around. They weren't at the moment, and she was taking the opportunity to launch into a full-fledged fit. I wondered why she was even flying commercially, given that her husband was a wildly successful Chicago businessman with his own fleet of planes. It had been nastily rumored that she never would have won her Senate seat without her husband's connections. People had gone so far as to suggest that the insatiable philanderer had essentially bought the Senate seat for her to more or less permanently get her off his back. I had always considered this to be 90% sexist smear tactic, but as I listened to the icy insults she was currently hurling at the intimidated airline official, I wondered if maybe there was some truth to it after all. Do you understand what's at stake here? Senator Spearham coldly inquired, for the 5th time. The airline employee was calling for backup. My own crisis awaited me at the hotel. Zach Lowerman, senior RG staffer in charge of the Cleveland office, smiled tightly as I climbed out of the cab. He was 10 years older than me and had never warmed to the idea that I had any real authority or skill. He also had an annoyingly sanctimonious way of suggesting that staying in Ohio was the more pure, honorable route for a student of public service. He often called me DC, which irked me to no end. We've got a problem, he said without even a hello. Ronkin's gotten some folks riled over the Canada thing, and they're forming a pretty big protest area. Oh, crap. Don Ronkin was an abrasive talk radio personality who hated RG and used every part of every show to rip him apart. A lot of people listened to him mainly because he was entertaining in his hostility. The level of vitriol he spewed conjured up images of someone mostly savage, foaming at the mouth, and spazzing about in a slanderous rage. Who wouldn't find that interesting? Many found it repulsive, granted, but there was no denying the popularity of the show. I had heard RG explaining to someone once that anything that appealed to people's baser fears and insecurities tended to carve out a permanent niche, like it or not. I hadn't wanted to believe him, but the evidence was beginning to pile up. Ronkin had lately seized upon RG's prescription drug proposal, and particularly his support of the plan to allow Americans to import cheaper medicine from Canada and Europe. Though this had been neutralized in the course of the compromise with Brayman, Ronkin could not forgive RG for ever even entertaining the thought. I made a regular practice of downloading transcripts of Ronkin's shows. Parentheses, it only played in Ohio, so I couldn't listen when I was in D.C., close parentheses, just to keep abreast of what he was saying. On RG's plan, he had spared no ire. Basically, the moronic Robert Gary wants to take jobs away from hardworking Americans and flood the country with cheap, dangerous foreign drugs. Does that sound like a good idea to you? Of course not. Call in and tell me your thoughts. Ronkin's strategy sought to hijack people's natural patriotism for his own misleading ends. Unfortunately, it was fairly effective, and now Zach was telling me that the open meeting scheduled for the next day, the big Cleveland kickoff, was in danger of becoming a public relations quagmire. Mark had done a great job of alerting a lot of the local press to the event, inviting many of them to tape it or run it live so that those who couldn't be there could still be kept apprised. It wasn't just about press for the event. It was about making more people aware of the opportunity to interface with their representative. The open meetings weren't scripted in any way, and therefore not guaranteed to go well for RG. It really depended on how he handled the questions. On the whole, people were generally respectful, and if they disagreed, did so in a polite way. But I knew better than to expect Ronkin's crowd to adhere to these understood rules of civility. We were going to have trouble on our hands. Zach looked panicked. They had been rehearsing their heckling all day. Who does that? Can heckling be rehearsed? It can when Ronkin's in charge, I answered grimly. Are they planning on staying outside in their own area, or do you expect them to pepper the crowd? I don't know. I just got wind of this an hour ago. They tried to recruit Kara to their ranks, not knowing who she was, of course. Kara was a college student who had been interning in RG's Cleveland office the last 2 summers. She was smart and dedicated, and I always hoped it would be she who'd answer the phone when I called. I got along with her well, and she would remind me of myself at her age if she wasn't so outgoing and put together. Is Kara around? I asked. Yeah, she's upstairs setting up RG's room. Great. I much preferred to hear bad news from her than from Zach, so I planned on pumping her for the details. Okay, calm down. We're just going to have to deal with this. Give me a little bit to think. You better come up with something, DC. I really disliked him, but I knew he was right. Upstairs, Kara was rigging up a fax and internet connection in RG's room. She smiled when I came in. Thank goodness you're here. I was just plotting how to slip a Valium into Zach's Diet Orange crush, she said good-naturedly. Is that still the only thing he'll drink? No. He has an occasional papaya juice, if it's iced down enough. Stocking the office refrigerator is a nightmare. I've taken to calling him Ziegler to cheer myself up as I'm sleeping away. I laughed, though I'd heard J-Lo really got an unfair rap with the whole diva reputation. I didn't claim to know the truth, I just took the debate as further proof that you can't believe everything you read, which didn't stop me from reading all of it. So, what was your impression of the Ronkin posse? I forced my brain away from the J-Lo musing and back on the bigger ass problems at hand. They're fired up for sure, trying to recruit anyone who passes by. They shouted at me that if I love my grandparents, I should do anything I can to stop Robert Gary from poisoning them. Compelling argument. And do you love your grandparents? I asked, cutting right to the heart of the issue. Nana pesters me about my double pierce, but yeah, they're okay, Kara answered. I'd be opposed to their poisoning. So the Ronkin folks had a hook. Anyway, I stuck around and talked to them for a while, Kara continued. I never let on that I wasn't on board. I figured it would be more useful if they thought I was on their side. Kara was smart. Zach would have exploded in their faces and threatened police action. I probably would have tried to bore them into submission with well-reasoned opposing arguments. And what else did you learn? I asked. They're fairly well organized, have a ton of camera-grabbing signs, and are planning some sort of costumed heckler. There was still some debate as to whether it should be a giant weasel or an executioner, and whether it should be wearing a beret or a turban. So it's a culturally sensitive crowd, I said dryly. Yeah. One of their arguments is that importing cheaper drugs from Canada and Europe would provide a steady cash flow to other governments that could then use American dollars to fund terrorist activities. Right? Canada was well known for that. Okay, well, do you have any suggestions for how to deal with these geniuses? Would they be responsive to an offer of a sit-down with RG? I knew they probably wouldn't be, but I thought it was worth investigating. Sometimes groups that were really interested in press attention appreciated being taken seriously by the individual they claimed to despise, and would slightly tone down their tactics in exchange. I don't think I have enough experience to be able to evaluate that, Kara said, but they didn't strike me as overly reasonable. I helped Kara finish setting up RG's mobile office as I mulled over the problem. RG arrived shortly thereafter to work on a speech he was giving in the morning before the open meeting. I decided to be upfront with him about the predicament after I determined his mood. How was the vacation, sir? He looked tanned and rested. It was good, thanks. What's going on here? Vacation small talk ruled out, I dove right in. Once RG was in work mode, there wasn't any distracting him. Well, sir, Don Ronkin's gotten a group organized to protest at your open meeting tomorrow. There's not time to move the location, but I am working on some alternate entrance and exit points, so hopefully we can throw some of them off. RG looked up at me with a clear, questioning gaze. My open meetings aren't restricted to supporters, Samantha, he said calmly. I knew that. Some of RG's most effective moments were when he was engaged with someone who opposed his positions. He explained his reasoning eloquently and invariably won the respect, if not the agreement, of whoever debated him. I know, sir, but this crowd seems solely focused on disruption. RG nodded. All right, do what you can and I'll handle the rest. Thanks for the heads up. I left him to his work and spent the rest of the afternoon scoping out the event site with Kara. RG had a round table with journalists scheduled for 5 p.m. in a conference room at the hotel that he asked me to sit in on. I stayed in the back with a notepad and pen, ready to write down anything that would need to be followed up on. I had already placed a tape recorder on the table in front of RG to ensure we had our own documentation of everything that was said, as I'd learned in the past that some journalists tended to invent quotes out of thin air. Around minute 25, I started to get the tiniest bit bored. RG was answering the 8th question about ethanol, and though I knew it was an important issue, especially to Ohioans, it just wasn't my particular passion. I surreptitiously fished the Economist out of my bag and was about to open it up to read the scathing European condemnation of America's healthcare system when a reporter mercifully switched the topic away from ethanol. Senator Gary, many seniors are confused and aggravated with the current state of Medicare. How would your proposal help make the system less complicated and easier to navigate? Asked a middle-aged man from the Plain Dealer, Ohio's largest newspaper. I always got a kick out of that name. In my opinion, newspapers could do a much better job in the nomenclature department. There were far too many Posts, Gazettes, Times, etc. I enjoyed any name that broke the mold. The New Orleans Times-Picayune was another favorite. The Picayune was, more than made up for the boring Times intro. The fact that a newspaper could name itself something that meant of little value or account, petty, carping, or prejudiced, struck me as endlessly amusing and very self-aware. As RG answered the question, it struck me that some of these questions were very good practice for the open meeting the next day. I took a minute to check how I myself would answer that question, which then led to a fantasy about me being the supreme ruler of the universe, parentheses, which wasn't even anything I desired, but one thing led to another, close parentheses, and that in turn led to me not having any idea why RG was all of a sudden saying my name. Would you mind, Samantha? He was asking. Mind what? I determined that I would mind being the supreme ruler. Parentheses, too much responsibility, not enough free time, close parentheses. But I doubted that's what he was referring to. Could I just borrow that for a second? He asked with the tiniest edge to his voice. Anyone who didn't spend a ton of time with him wouldn't have even been able to hear the twinge of annoyance. What was he talking about? I followed his gaze. Got it. He wanted my copy of The Economist. Of course. I thought I'd heard him refer to its healthcare article during the course of his answer. Somewhere around the time I was pondering what planet should house a royal vacation ski condo. Probably somewhere cold, like Pluto. Absolutely, sir. I've got it right here. All eyes were on me as I leapt up and delivered the magazine to RG. I wished I had read the piece already and knew what example he was about to reference. Oh well, I'd just make sure I got it back. He would give it back, wouldn't he? It had sent me back $4. I listened to RG talking about a particular feature of Sweden's healthcare system that he admired as I returned to my seat. The Economist article evidently had a helpful chart that succinctly summarized it, and he wanted to ensure he got the details right as he went forward with his point. So bear with me while I just open up to it for a second, and RG paused. The room erupted in laughter, and I strained my neck to see what had caused the commotion. Oh dear God. In attempting to flip to the article, he had flipped to the middle of the Us Weekly that was still hidden inside it. Specifically, he had flipped to a giant close-up of Lil' Kim's boobs being barely covered by some leopard print pasties. I wasn't sure if all the reporters were familiar with the pint-sized rapper's consistently flamboyant style, that it was all part of her image and shouldn't be construed as pointlessly pornographic, but I was pretty sure RG was not. He didn't spend a lot of time reading magazines that had, what was she thinking, fashion sections? I felt myself blush a deep crimson. RG cleared his throat. Well, I hope everyone's awake now, he said. The reporters laughed. He removed the Us Weekly and flipped to the much more staid healthcare article. I did my best to blend into the wall. Afterwards, a few of the journalists smiled evilly at me as they filed out of the room. I went to help RG gather his things. I'm really sorry about that, sir. I'm not quite sure how that magazine ended up in there, I lied. RG seemed to know I wasn't being entirely truthful. Samantha, he said sternly, I'd really appreciate it if you could answer me one question. Yes, sir, I replied with tremendous trepidation. Had I finally pushed him over the edge? He seemed genuinely mad. I would like to know, he paused, just what exactly was she thinking? It took me a second to realize that he was referring to the fashion section headline of the Little Kim display, and that he was joking. Relief cascaded through me. Thank goodness RG had a sense of humor. See you in the morning, he said with a grin. He handed me both my magazines and was gone. I had done absolutely everything I could to prepare for the next day's events by 8 o'clock that night, and was sitting bored in my room when I realized I hadn't called Liza to check on the fallout from Ryan's foursome proposal. She was still at work because the Mayflower was hosting a telemarketers convention. Parentheses, I had already thoroughly cursed my bad luck for having to be out of town and miss it, close parentheses. But she answered her cell phone right away. Hey, how's it going there? I asked cheerily. Oh, fine, she said dismissively. She clearly did not understand the magical quality of the event she was witnessing. Listen, she continued, Ryan was really, really drunk last night. We did a couple shots of Jaeger while you and Aaron were dancing. The Jägermeister defense. I knew it well. Oh, yeah, of course, I said benevolently. We were all pretty loaded. It was fun, though. So anyway, sorry if he was sort of an idiot, she finished. He had been an idiot, but that really wasn't the fault of the shots. Hey, don't mention it, I said. As long as you're okay, that's all I care about. Hopefully, she was realizing Ryan was not her Prince Charming. It usually took about 3 days between the realization and the start of the complaints, which then meant another 2 weeks until the breakup. She was fiercely loyal to the idea that all these terrible guys were actually secretly wonderful, right up until the moment she could no longer deny their essential dreadfulness, which made that moment incredibly key. Time after time, I did my best to hurry along that flash of realization, but she was stubborn about her pace. I'm great, she assured me. You know, he's amazing in so many ways. I think he's got real potential. So I was in for at least another month of Ryan. Oh well. I hung up with Liza after making her promise she would pay closer attention to what the telemarketers were up to and give me a more extensive and satisfying report later on. I left Aaron a voicemail and sent him a BlackBerry, but didn't hear immediately back from him. After rejecting room service based on its exorbitant prices, I snacked on some graham crackers and fluff, and looked up the fastest fire escape route from my room in the hotel information binder. It seemed a little confusing, and I decided to practice it to be safe. On my way back from the successful trial escape, I ran into Kara in the hallway. Hey, you want to go get a drink at the hotel bar, she asked. Was it possible she was also bored even though she lived here? Oh, I hope so. I needed a partner in crime. I'd love to, I answered gratefully. Over 2 glasses of wine, Kara revealed that she did, in fact, have plenty of other places to be, but her boyfriend was working nearby and she was waiting for him before heading back to their neighborhood. What does he do? I asked, hoping that she'd then ask me all about my fancy new boyfriend. I wasn't always the kind of person who just waited to talk. I usually was, in fact, a fairly good listener, but I felt like letting Kara know that there was something different and wonderful about me this time around. In the event I could still qualify as some sort of role model for her. I knew it was a long shot. He's an actor, actually, she answered unexpectedly. Really? I was intrigued. Has he been in anything I'd know? Probably not. We still have a year of college left, so he's mainly done plays in the Cleveland area, but he's recently landed a couple commercials. He's shooting one tonight, actually, for Radio Shack. I happen to love Radio Shack mainly for its name. They didn't seem to feel the need to impress anyone, which I appreciated. That's great, I said, genuinely enthused. She seemed quite enamored. She told me all about him, and he did sound funny and cool, but she seemed to be missing the fact that the whole point of this conversation was to get around to me. At last she asked me about Aaron, allowing me to happily launch into my spiel about his many lovable qualities and the blissful state of our union. I decided to avoid mentioning the tension that existed in our relationship, since that was less easy to brag about. As Kara listened, I imagined for a second that we were sisters. This led to me checking out her foot size to see how productive it would be to raid her closet, which then made me think about the fights we would have when I did so without asking, which then made me imagine the tearful toast she would give at my wedding, about how through all the silly arguments and serious life trials, we were the only ones who really understood each other, and we'd be there for each other forever. By the time I was done, Kara really was toasting me. To the men in our lives, may they realize how damn lucky they are, she said with a smile. I'd drink to that. I made my way back to my room after Kara's boyfriend showed up. As I was testing out the complimentary robe, my BlackBerry buzzed. To Samantha Joyce, srjoyce@gary.senate.gov. From Aaron Driver, aidriver@bremen.senate.gov. Subject, thoughts on streaking streets of Cleveland out of boredom. Text, hey gorgeous, glad you made it in safely. My cell phone's out of juice, call you in the morning. Good luck tomorrow, miss you. Okay. High points of his message. 1. The gorgeous adjective. Strong opening. Not entirely accurate, but if I had him fooled, fabulous. 2. Wishing me luck on work stuff. Showed he cared about all aspects of my life and wasn't threatened by my pursuit of a career. Crucial. And 3. He missed me. Always important. No indication to the degree of the emotion, but let's assume it's intense. Now for the low points. 1. His cell phone's out of juice. I didn't question that it was. I questioned his distance from all other usable phones. Why was calling on his cell his only option? Was he out at an event with Bremen that would run too late to call me when he got home? Fine, but if so, I'd like to be more thoroughly informed. 2. Continuing the cell phone out of juice complaints. This didn't speak to a strong sense of responsibility. If he forgets to charge his cell phone, will he also forget to, say, pick up our daughter Riley from preschool? Unacceptable. This tendency would need to be watched and trained out of him. And 3, small point, but he didn't address the subject line or text of my original message to him. Slightly inconsiderate, but could be forgiven via more bouquets of roses. With that analysis complete, I went over the next day's schedule one last time, requested a wake-up call, wondered if anyone had ever died in the room I was staying in, got up to turn the bathroom light on for protection, and finally drifted off to sleep. In my dream, Aaron and I were at a rave in Atlantis, shimmying around the strobe-lighted magical creatures and trying to determine whether we had inadvertently taken some sort of drug, or if Atlantis was simply teeming with shape-shifting supernatural beings. We never got a definitive answer, though we did do the electric slide with a jive-talking unicorn. I woke up disoriented, as I always did in hotels. I opened my eyes cautiously, looking with trepidation towards the spot where Shackleton's bowl would be if I had been in my apartment. Instead of him, I saw a cheap knockoff of a Georgia O'Keeffe hanging on an unfamiliar beige wall. My brain worked furiously to make sense of this information. Where can it possibly be? Have I been kidnapped? And if so, by whom? And was the ransom sufficiently exorbitant? Had I been kidnapped? Oh, I read that part. My brain clicked suddenly into present consciousness, and everything became clear. Right, Cleveland. On the road with RG. Open meeting. I did a quick body scan. Yep, all my limbs were intact. Vital signs seem reasonable. I breathed a sigh of relief. My phone rang stridently, breaking my newfound calm. But I was thrilled to hear Aaron's voice on the other end. Hey, baby, did you sleep well? He asked. I love that he called me baby. Normally, I would have hated it, but with him it felt more adoring than infantilizing. Okay, I guess. You were in my dream, I replied. I hadn't said it suggestively, but he took it that way, which, given that he was a guy, wasn't that surprising. Give me all the naughty details, he demanded, sounding genuinely interested. I complied, but had to explain twice that dancing with a unicorn was not a euphemism for anything. He seemed disappointed. Alright, well, good luck today. I'll call you later, baby. I got off the phone and realized I hadn't even had a chance to ask him about his night. Kara knocked on my door soon after with a box full of Krispy Kreme donuts and a cup of coffee. I'm feeling competitive with the other staff offices. I want Cleveland to be the best stop on the tour, so I'm pulling out the big guns, she explained. Gosh, I love Krispy Kremes. As we sat there, devouring the box and running through the day schedule, I started thinking how fun it would be if Kara came to work in the DC office after she graduated. Perhaps I could gently nudge her in that direction, inspire her in some way with my own experience. Have you thought about your postgraduate plans? We could really use you back on the hill, I said, in my most gracious and encouraging tone. I was going to be a fabulous mentor. You've got chocolate glaze on your ear, Kara pointed. Yes, I certainly did. RG's open meeting got underway 2 hours later in a packed auditorium. Ronkin's protesters had shouted at us upon arrival, and their mascot, they'd gone with a weasel wearing a beret, had danced tauntingly around us, but RG had just smiled and waved and went ahead like a man completely unfazed. Inside, the room was full and sweaty, uncomfortable proof of a great turnout. Kara and I had put out some boxes of Krispy Kremes and bottles of water at the last minute, which were gigantic hits. I hadn't planned on any refreshments for the open meetings, because we didn't have the budget for it, but judging by the happy response to the donuts presents, I decided it was worth it to spend a little personal money to ensure a successful trip. The curmudgeonly fire chief I had talked to earlier on the phone loudly took credit for the refreshments, explaining to his neighbors that he had talked some sense into me. I just smiled and thanked him for his support of RG. RG himself was sweating in the cramped heat, but looking calm and purposeful. He opened up with some general remarks about how great it was to be back in Cleveland, how much he enjoyed the chance to get together and talk, and how eager he was to listen to any and all of their concerns. An elderly man in overalls stood up and asked about subsidies for farmers. A mother brought up the overcrowding in her children's classrooms. A young policeman asked about the impact of the budget shortfalls. An older lady talked about how annoying it was that her neighbor had put his mulch pile right up against the fence, and could Archie call him and ask him to move it. Archie listened closely to every question and answered each one fully. He bowed out of the mulch pile call, much to the chagrin of the old lady, but everyone else seemed fairly satisfied. He then took some time to explain the prescription drug proposal that was being debated in Congress and described why he thought it would improve the current system if we could get it passed. This prompted a round of questions seeking clarification about the bill's many proposals. Unlike the Capitol Hill discussions of the bill, this one was characterized by simple language devoid of rhetorical flourishes and technical terms. The citizens of Cleveland wanted to know how the bill would help them in very specific, straightforward ways. My job was to follow up with questioners who seemed to need more answers, so I spent my time running around with a notepad and some printout explanations of RG's bill, complete with helpful bullet points. After 2.5 hours, almost everyone had gotten FaceTime with RG, and I had followed up with over 20 people, taking down their names and contact information, and promising to stay in touch with updates that pertained to their particular issues. I was currently hearing all about Sandra O'Malley's distressing battle with severe halitosis. Sandra wanted to know if Medicare would cover her condition under RG's proposal, and I tried to talk to her through it while avoiding breathing through my nose at all costs. Her breath was really, really bad. I felt sorry for her, but I also was feeling increasingly queasy and had a few more people to get to before the crowd completely dispersed. So I go through 2 or 3 bottles of mouthwash a day, but you can see it doesn't even make a dent. She breathed threateningly on me. Yes, I could. Ugh. I was starting to wish hard for a minor earthquake to strike and distract Sandra so I could escape from her breath's clutches when Kara appeared at my elbow. I'm afraid we need you outside for a second, she said very professionally. I excused myself from Mrs. O'Malley and was about to quietly thank Kara as we walked away when I realized she hadn't been making up a rescuing story at all. They really did need me outside. The beret-clad weasel had commandeered a bullhorn and was drawing a crowd of cameras. We made our own deck of Ohio's most wanted public enemies. As you can see, Robert Gary is the ace of spades. The weasel shouted as he flourished a card with an extremely unflattering picture of RG, outfitted with a digitally added beret. A deck of cards. How original. Unfortunately, the weasel had positioned himself squarely in front of RG's car. With his successful recruitment of cameras, he had set up a well-documented ambush. RG would have to deal with his heckling head-on, and the cameras would be there to catch every exchange. I knew that no matter how well the open meeting had gone, the only coverage that would make it onto the evening news would be conflict footage, since that's what the media seemed to thrive on these days. Zach Globerman was standing near the weasel with his head in his hands. He looked like a sculpture of ineffective despair, a sort of surrendering companion piece to Rodin's thinker. I turned to Kara. We'll have to get him out another way, I said. Kara nodded. I parked my car by the back exit of the hall, in case something like this happened, she replied, as she handed over the keys. There's a side exit as well, but the back's the most secluded. All you have to do is get RG out that way, and then take off for the train station. You can just leave the car there with the keys under the wheel. I'll pick it up later. She sounded so confident. But the hecklers will never let us through, I answered, indicating the riled throng currently blocking the driveway of the town hall. Unless you have tinted windows, they'll see RG, and then the shot will be that he's running away, which we definitely don't want. Kara shook her head. Leave that to me and I'll make sure it's clear. Remember, they think I'm on their side. Just call me when you guys are getting in the car, okay? I nodded uncertainly. I wanted to believe her, but I just couldn't see how she was going to pull it off. I listened to the weasel shouting about RG's communist credentials and hurried back inside. RG was talking earnestly to a young man in a Navy uniform. He looked up as I walked towards them. Samantha, could you take down this man's information and make sure we check on the status of his father's Social Security checks? He hasn't been receiving them, and we need to get to the bottom of this. Absolutely, sir, I replied as I whipped out my notebook. The young man gratefully shook RG's hand and told me how to get in touch with him. When we finished, RG was deep in conversation with an elderly man who was very concerned about illegal aliens. He said he saw no reason why their health care should be paid for by taxing the incomes of legitimate residents. I listened as RG patiently explained his commitment to the idea that America was a country of immigrants, and we needed to celebrate that fact, and that though he agreed that legal migration was obviously preferable, he couldn't deny basic medical assistance to any person who fell sick or injured in the state of Ohio. The man did not like what he was hearing and seemed to grow more agitated the more calmly RG spoke. But if we welcome them with open arms, what's to prevent them from annihilating the human race? He responded in a challenging voice. Huh? RG looked as confused as I was. What makes you think they would do such a thing? RG asked. They're human as well. Had this man really demonized people from other countries to the extent that he considered them anti-human? This was xenophobia taken to an illogical extreme. Oh, come on. You've seen all the movies, the old man insisted. They never want to get along. They abduct people and probe them and destroy all the cities. If we don't put up a fight, we won't have a chance. At the first sign of a spaceship, we gotta blast them to Kingdom Come. RG and I simultaneously realized precisely what we were dealing. They're already disguised among us, you know. The man was continuing. This is a serious issue. Thank you so much for your time, I said in a strained but even tone. I wish we could stay longer, but I'm afraid I've got to get Senator Gary to his next appointment. The alien hater looked miffed. Yeah, okay, he grumbled reluctantly. Don't forget what I said, though. There's tons more that feel the way I do. Were there really? RG and I excused ourselves and prepared to leave. I quickly explained the weasel ambush to him, and though I could tell RG wanted to confront the situation head-on, I was extremely grateful that he agreed to go along with my plan. I imagine that the illegal alien debate had reminded him that there were some situations that were just best to avoid. As we slid out the back exit and into Kara's car, I rang her cell phone. We're all set, I informed her, praying that her plan would work. Okay, perfect timing, she said. A decoy just rolled by. Hang on a second. It sounded as though she had put the phone in her pocket, and that she was running. Hey, Ronnie, I heard her call in an excited, panting voice. I just saw that wimp Robert Gary run out the side door and pull off in a van. What? Which way'd they go? That way. We can catch them at the light if we run. Hey, everyone, follow Kara. I heard the weasel take up the cry over the bullhorn. "Follow Kara! Gary's trying to escape!" As the sound of a stampeding crowd reverberated through the static, I started the car and pulled gingerly forward. Sure enough, the driveway was clear, and all of the cameras and hecklers were swarming a hapless van stopped at a nearby light. As I turned the car in the opposite direction, I caught sight of Kara next to the weasel at the front of the pack, red-faced and yelling, pounding on the side of the van. Zach was observing her from a short distance away, looking extremely confused. I smiled and sped towards the station, where we caught our train just in time.